For today's video, I'm going to be sharing my experiences of keeping betta fish with long fins and tails to those that have short fins and tails. I know that the differences may seem obvious, but I do want to start by discussing the actual appearances and what I mean by these terms. There's a lot of different tail types for betta fish in the hobby these days, and to be honest, I don't know most of them, and it does seem that different breeders just try and think of cool names to try and sell their fish, so for this video I'll be using the generic terms of long and short. By long, I'm talking about betta fish that have tails that have been selectively bred to be far larger than normal, sometimes even larger than the actual fish's body, which can lead to several issues. By short, I'm referring to betta fish with smaller, more natural sized tails which allow them to swim quickly through the water and really aren't much of a burden. At the time of recording, I've kept Skittles, Stitch and Marmalade that all had short tails, and Khuli which had a long tail. I know that a lot of people see the large colourful tails of the long tail bettas and want them for their own tank, but they do come with some drawbacks. And that brings me on to my next point, swimming. Short tail betta fish have a lighter, more natural tail that allows them to quickly swim through the water with minimal effort to get to their food or to go and investigate and explore their habitat. Their lighter tails also make it easier for them to rest, and in my experience they tend to be far more active in their aquarium than my long tail. All of my short tail bettas seem to be constantly on the move and exploring, looking for food, and they rarely take breaks and they'll eagerly swim around their tank to see what's happening. One downside of their faster swim speed is that they could have a higher chance of jumping out of the aquarium if you don't keep a lid on your tank. Thankfully, I haven't had any of my betta fish jump, but it could be a good idea to either lower your water level in the tank or use a lid with your tank if you are going to keep a short tail. On the other hand, long tail betta fish have heavier, larger tails that create a lot more drag in the water as they swim. This added weight and reduced streamlining can make swimming more difficult, as a lot of the power generated via the tail is lost due to its flexibility. I know that this might not be true for all long tail bettas, and like I said, I've only kept one long tail myself, but I do see people on social media report similar issues with their betta fish that have longer tails. For example, my longer tail betta, Khuli, often had to take breaks as he was swimming around his tank just to take a rest from supporting the weight of his tail. Thankfully, this slow swim speed may actually help reduce the chances of your betta fish being aggressive towards its tank mates and increase the chances of things like shrimp being able to get away, while also reducing the chance of the betta being able to jump out of its tank. On the flip side of that though, it does come with its own set of challenges, and that brings me on to my next point, feeding your betta fish. In my experience, feeding short tail bettas has been far easier than feeding long tails, as their speed allows them to quickly investigate where the food is and then eat it before it starts to sink. Fortunately, I've been able to keep shrimp with 3 of my 4 betta fish, but I've honestly lost count of the number of times my long tail betta missed out on food before it would start to sink and then the shrimp would end up stealing it. As a result of this, I ended up having to add more food to the tank, which slightly increases the bio load and the risk of having problems with water parameters. This could become a real issue if you keep your long-tailed betta fish in a community tank with faster fish species that can easily outcompete the betta for food. My short-tail bettas have absolutely no trouble swimming around in these tanks, but the depth did pose a challenge for my long-tail betta, and it would take them longer to swim from the top to the bottom. I know that a lot of people say betta fish are surface-dwelling fish, and while this may be true, especially if they're hungry, all 4 of my betta fish have been happy to go off and explore all levels of their aquarium. To improve the quality of life of my long tail betta, I actually picked up this far shorter yet longer tank that's 6.6 US gallons or 25 litres for him to live in. The theory was that the shorter but longer tank would make it easier for him to get to the surface to feed or breathe, because betta fish have a labyrinth organ and they can breathe from the surface. After purchasing that tank, I did come up with the idea of using narrowleaf java fern in one of my 8-gallon tanks to create resting spots at different levels, hoping to make it as comfortable as possible for him to take breaks as he swam around. Unfortunately though, my long-tailed betta did pass away last month before he had a chance to enjoy his new aquarium, but my new betta fish Marmalade has settled right into the tank without issue. I know it's not essential, but I honestly do think that if you plan ahead and consider things like this about the dimensions of your aquarium, you can definitely improve the quality of life of a long-tailed betta fish. So moving on, and let's talk about the different filter options on the market, as different filters can produce very different water flow levels in your aquarium. I often see people say that betta fish need low flow in their tanks, and while this is probably true if I'm honest, it's difficult to define exactly what low flow means as there's no standardised measurements for it. My short-finned bettas have done well in tanks with both sponge filters and hang-on back filters without any major issues in terms of their swimming abilities. For example, this hang-on back filter is set to about 80% of its maximum flow, and I often see Marmalade swimming in and out of its flow without any trouble. However, the same definitely can't be said for long-finned bettas, as their larger tails and reduced swimming power can make even a small amount of water flow difficult for them to manage. I've actually seen my long-tailed betta fish get pushed around by light levels of water flow generated by a simple air stone in his tank. On top of that, just recommending people use a sponge filter for their betta fish tanks isn't always enough either. Different air pumps have very different output levels which can drastically affect their water flow rate. I usually use small, cheap USB air pumps that have a low output level, and they usually work well with long-finned bettas. On the other hand, even a slightly more powerful air pump can generate far more water flow in the tank, and then there's even more powerful ones on the market as well, which can drastically increase water flow. So even though the actual sponge filter in the betta fish's tank remains the same size, it's actually the air pump that's outside of the tank that'll play the major role. Tank size also matters with things like this as well, as you need to balance the surface area of your filter, the air pump's output, and the total volume of water in the tank that needs to be filtered. So a sponge filter is still probably the best option for a long-tailed betta fish, but it's also important to pair it with a small, low-powered air pump in a tank that's of between 5 and 10 US gallons. This should make sure that the water flow is not too much for your betta fish to handle, but there's still enough water flow in there to drag the water into the filter to clean it and keep the toxins out of the tank. I want to quickly talk about tank mate aggression as well, as all three of my short-tailed bettas have made attempts to go after the shrimp in their tanks, but my long-tailed betta seems far more content just swimming around and watching them. Even if he wanted to be aggressive towards his tank mates, his slow swim speed would have made it difficult for him to catch shrimp and healthy fish, making it easier for his tank mates to escape. I kept my long-tailed betta fish with 10 chili rasboras, and he never showed any aggression towards them either. As I mentioned earlier though, this is a very small sample size, as I've only ever kept one long-tailed betta fish, but if he did want to be aggressive, his slow swim speed would make it more difficult for him to catch anything. Another important thing to consider is the actual tank decorations you keep in the aquarium. Short-tailed betta fish can easily navigate a variety of hardscapes without issue, but long-tailed betta fish may struggle in certain setups. For example, I kept Stitch, one of my short-tailed bettas, in an 8-gallon tank with lava rock as its hardscape. Lava rock is a textured rock that has small little abrasions on it that can be sharp, so I'd never keep a betta fish in a tank like this, as I'd be too nervous about its tail getting torn. Now that might just be me being overly cautious, and you do what you want with your betta fish tanks, but it is something to consider. Finally, I want to mention the resting behaviours of the two fish types. Unlike my short-tailed betta fish, which were always active and had occasionally paused to check for food and see what was happening in their tank, my long-tailed betta frequently had to take breaks. When he did stop swimming, you could see the back half of his body lower in the water as well, as if the weight of his tail was pulling it down. I've never once noticed this with any of my short-tailed bettas who are constantly on the move, and when they do take a break, their body just stays as it was. This gives me the impression that short-tailed bettas may have a better overall quality of life, as they're just not fighting the extra weight in their tail. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I just wanted to share my personal experiences with these different types of betta fish. Again, I'm not saying all long-tailed bettas have these issues, but it is something to think about. Personally, I actually prefer short-tailed bettas anyway, and I do just plan to go down that route in the future with more betta fish purchases next year. Anyway, thanks for watching the video and have a good day.